Everyone to a psychosocial safety leadership webinar. It's really a deep dive into bullying and burnout. If you have not been to any of our wellbeing events by CWH before, welcome. It's lovely to have you here and to see a few returning faces as well. Before we start today's event, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I'm dialing in from the land of the Bunurong and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. I pay my respect to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge anyone on the call with lived experience or the caring of those with mental ill health. Today, Carson will be hosting this session to you. He is a psychosocial safety management specialist, so the perfect expert to talk to us today about a deep dive into bullying and burnout. I am a wellbeing keynote speaker, a researcher, and the CEO of Corporate Wellbeing Hub. I'm going to be in the background today. It's a completely interactive event, so if you've got questions all the way through, pop them in the chat box. We've got a few live polls running as well during the session. So I hope you enjoyed today's session, and I will hand over to Bill. Thanks, Bill.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carli, and welcome everybody. Wonderful to be here. I geek out on this topic. Yesterday, I was running a session for HR managers in Ballarat. I've moved from Sydney to Torquay, Victoria last year, and I was up in Ballarat. There was about 50 people, which really went down well. Covered off a lot of this kind of territory, but we're going to specifically look at the kind of challenging areas of bullying and burnout and kind of focus on those to a degree. So we're covering off here a deep dive into those areas that I mentioned within the whole context of psychosocial safety leadership. So a quick getting a sense from you at this point in time. So in terms of the mental health culture in your organization, would you say that you're in the green zone, energized, 6 to 10, everyone's kind of feeling pretty good about their mental health? Or generally is the organization company around about the 4 to 5 out of 10 level, feeling a bit blah? Or is there a lot of red where there's feelings of tiredness, sadness, anxiousness, anger, frustration, complaining, blaming? So just quickly drop into the chat where you'd say you are at the moment and maybe some whys.
Blah's a good word, isn't it? And meh and blah kind of fit into the same category for number two.
Yeah. Is there some mehs coming through, Carli?
So if everyone can just jump into the chat, just type in 1, 2, or 3, just to describe your mental health culture in your workplace today.
We got twos. Oh, lots of twos, a bit across the spectrum overall. Split the difference with a 2. 1, Mr. Brad Moore. Ones and twos, probably 3, Ludmilla. 5 and 6, cool. Good. So generally, yep, in that sort of mid-range overall. Alrighty, so good. We'll dive in. So we're going to look at, first of all, a case scenario to kind of set some context around this topic. Then dive into exploring an understanding of bullying and burnout, some of the potential causes. Then we'll look at the psychosocial safety audit and a case scenario around that, focus groups, and then start to look at the whole theme around controlling psychosocial risks. So super bit of overview of me. There's a range of activities that I get involved in. That's me in a beekeeping suit. I did a certificate 3 in beekeeping a few years ago. It's not my spaceship suit, not flying into space like the boys with lots of extra money. I'm a psychosocial safety specialist, ISO 45003 accredited, run over 3 health first aid workshops, and I'm also a very committed home crisis supporter. I did a total of about 5-6 hours over the last weekend. And I geek out in this area. I've done a lot of work additionally in social emotional intelligence, well-being, executive coaching. I originally began my career with a Bachelor of Science in Metallurgy at Melbourne Uni, and I always had this really strong interest in psychology and teaching. At the time, I didn't do those subjects for a whole raft of reasons, but the universal intelligence wanted me to get there. And so in the mid 90s-ish, I moved over into corporate training, did a lot of sales and negotiations, presentation skills, etc. And then got into my Ikigai world about 7 years ago in this whole area of mental health education and psychosocial safety, etc., and done additional studies in neuroscience and so forth. So we're going to look at and start off with an example, and this comes specifically from a client experience that we've had in a situation. So imagine this. So you have a team member or a colleague. Their name is Eleanor Alicia, and their performance has been steadily decreasing for a few weeks. So as a manager, supervisor, team leader, or even as a colleague, you have a chat with Alan or Alicia a couple of weeks ago related to their performance, and they were, and I'm probably not under, surprisingly, but dismissive. Anyway, a few weeks go by, and then Eleanor and Alicia come to you, and they now say that they feel that they are being bullied by another team member, Jack or Jenny. How would you handle it? So just reflect for, 10, 20, 30 seconds and pop something into the chat. How would you respond to this? What are now going to become more and more classic psychosocial hazard risk type scenarios for managers, team leaders, potentially flowing on to HR, work health and safety. So I invite you to just throw a few words in there. How would you handle this situation?
Thanks, Donna. Acknowledge feelings, ask questions, and get details. Rachel says, listen and understand what has occurred. Liz says, ask questions, tell me the story. That's nice. Brad says, find out more specific details about the bullying.
Mm,
Miller says, we'll ask questions to get more info. And Zena, acknowledge, ask open-ended questions.
good.
Leader, be curious without judgment.
Very good. Knowledge and opening. Good. Alrighty. So everyone's kind of pretty switched into this particular topic. And it's interesting, isn't it, that there's already an inherent knowledge, and as good quality learning human beings, it's learning what other distinctions there are. So what happened in this particular instance, and this is a true case scenario, the manager who previously would not have been skilled in handling these situations at all had safe conversations skills training with me. And what people are taught, and it's along the lines of what you've kind of touched on there before, is fundamentally how to see the signs where someone might be struggling, then to be able to actually enter into that conversation. And SAFE is an acronym for the way the conversation is held. Number one, the person needs to have self-awareness. So the manager needs to be like in the space to be able to have this type of conversation. If they're too busy or there's too much stuff going on, they're probably not going to handle it very well. The ability to ask good quality questions and acknowledge, focus on listening and empower. And the fundamental theme here is the ability to actually help the person to come to their own self-awareness. And so the essence of this is what the manager didn't do was that he didn't, in this case, he didn't get defensive because, manager brain tries to get in and solve the problem. They didn't try to solve the problem. They didn't try to tell Alan or Alicia what to do. What the manager, through the skills training that they'd had, learned, they focused on listening, coming from a place of empathy. And there's a big distinction between empathy and sympathy. I just recently did a TED talk and clarified that, asking really good questions and to help Alan and Alicia, as I said, to develop their own self-awareness about what's going on for them. Because a lot of people, when they're struggling with stuff, they will tend to blame others. And so guess what was going on for Alan and Alicia? They were going through a divorce, and it had been going on for a number of weeks. And what was happening is, and I'll explain this in a moment, Alan and Alicia's stress reaction style was to internalize, and they were actually then starting to feel much more sensitive, vulnerable, I suppose you could say, to other people's behavior in the team, and started to find that Jack Jenny's rambunctious kind of behavior felt to Alan and Alicia as bullying. And this whole topic of bullying is quite subjective. And so you have this kind of situation where Alan and Alicia is kind of feeling exhausted, emotionally really struggling, some degree of kind of like burnout in a way, and then interpreting someone else's behavior as bullying. And if you look then at the business case associated with something like this, if this was not handled well, and it doesn't get handled well in a lot of environments, then that could easily have turned into a stress leave bullying claim that's at a minimum is going to cost 30 to 50K, generally more. Then you've got to replace the person. And so, for a cost of around 80 to 100K plus, $5,000 training program could avoid an enormous amount of those sorts of costs. So this one of the key things we're going to touch on here is that a hugely valuable control measure for managers and around psychosocial risks is teaching managers how to actually notice what to look for, what would be the signs to notice where someone might be struggling. So let's now dive into then this topic of understanding bullying and burnout, and then what might be the causes and so forth. So we're going to look at some definitions and then some of the causes. So bullying under the legislation guidelines is repeated unreasonable behaviour directed towards a person or a group that has the potential to create a risk to health and safety. Intention is irrelevant, and bullying may or may not be obvious. It's direct or can be subtle, indirect. Now, one of the really important distinctions, because and I've heard it a number of times by generally senior leaders or managers, people can't handle a bit of pressure these days. No, bullying is not the legitimate and fair performance management practices and feedback, nor the occasional raised voice or argument, nor the renegotiation of workplace priorities and workloads. But the particular distinction there is around repeated and unreasonable. Now, again, this can be certainly open to interpretation, and we'll kind of look at this and explore it in a little bit more detail shortly. And if we look at burnout, then the definitions around burnout is a state of chronic physical and emotional exhaustion, often accompanied by feelings of cynicism and detachment from work, as well as a sense of reduced personal accomplishment. And it's primarily associated with prolonged periods of stress, particularly related to one's job or responsibilities. Now, the responsibilities piece is really, really important, because what can happen is that someone might be having sort of reasonable demands of work, but if they've got significant pressures outside of work, and Carli, we're talking about this, and Carli will share an example shortly, then that will significantly increase the load, the emotional load, the stress load that someone might be carrying. And this is a piece that's really, really important to understand. So what causes bullying and burnout? Number one, the individual's reaction to stress or social threat. So there's an individual component. Then there's the situational component. and then there's the workplace culture component. So everyone is pretty familiar with this curve, the Keyes-Dodson curve that we've seen before. And if we look at the relationship of performance to pressure, stress, threat, and loss, then, generally, when we're working in environments where there's, lots of good pressure and we're working to our capabilities and sometimes stress, stretched more, and there's a good sense of support and psychological safety, both, either at home or at work, etc., then we can often produce our peak performance. But if we're going too hard, then we often will get fatigue, and particularly corporate environments tend to create the conditions for this sometimes a bit too often. If you look at professional sport, there's always be peak performance and then a break, peak performance and then a break, and often we need to be mindful of that in a work context. But if we go too hard, where there's additional pressure, stress, threat, and loss, then that fatigue starts to get into anger, panic, and anxiety, and then we get into the really difficult areas of burnout, bullying, and breakdown, and I'll explain those a bit more right now. So one of the fundamental themes that all of us are familiar with is the 3 F's of fight, flight, and freeze associated with stress. Now, sometimes, people refer to this as, old parts of the brain, lizard brain, etc., etc. But the reality is, it is absolutely critical for us as human beings because we are a highly evolved social species. And so in a physical context, every species on the planet needs to look after itself through the 3 F's. So, but we as humans, we do something that is massively different to every other species on the planet. So I'll give you an example. You're driving along and someone cuts you off, like quite suddenly. And in that moment, then you will hit the anchors and brake from a physical safety perspective. But then we, as a animal species, we do something that no other animal on the planet will do. Our thoughts and feelings will go up to, how dare you? How dare you do this to me? We got either incredibly angry or some other reaction. And so the stress reaction that we experience as humans is the number one problem on the planet, because vast numbers of humans do not have self-awareness. So many of us don't have self-awareness around how our stress reaction is getting fired off so frequently, and it gets fired off either because of stress or because of threat or because of loss. And there's a bunch of other ones as well. So people who have an externalizing stress reaction style, fundamentally coming from a fight place, they do anger. They will attack others, criticize others, judge others. It's your fault. You made me do it. And then those of us who have an internalizing stress reaction style, we will criticize and judge ourselves and attack self, make ourselves wrong. I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, and fundamentally do anxiety. And then, as many of you would know about this, then often we will have the freeze brain experience, where just bucket loads of cortisol go into the prefrontal cortex, etc. So it's another stress reaction response, which is freeze, which is fundamentally avoidance. So the 3 F's cause or are triggered by stress, threat, and loss to produce the 3 A's of anger, anxiety, and avoidance. Now, most of us will have a default stress reaction style. I know that for me personally, my normal one is anxiety, to internalize, I should say. But then there are other times when I might get quite angry, and sometimes I get quite frustrated on the roads. And I just found out this morning that there's been a change of speed limit on a sort of road that I travel, that's been changed from 60 to 50, and I didn't see it, and I've incurred 2 speeding fines. So so I'm not happy. So the thing then for us to understand is that what happens under increasing amounts of stress, the 3 A's, the 3 F's, which cause then the 3 A's, cause the 3 B's. And the 3 B's are bullying and burnout and binging. So what happens under increasing amounts of stress, people who have an externalizing stress reaction style continue to blame others. And in a work situation, that starts to be interpreted as bullying. In a home situation, and it's fundamentally domestic violence or coercive control. In a societal perspective, it's young boys running around with machetes trying to work, with their really bad behavior. Those people who internalize and their thoughts go to, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, under increasing amounts of stress and the need to, perfectionism, prove myself, we burn ourselves out. And in significant, lot of cases, those internalizing thoughts can go to a place of, I don't want to live anymore, people would be better off without me, having suicidal thoughts. And this is one of the things that I've found from, over 700 hours with Lifeline and mental health first aid and a lot of training in suicide prevention, is that fundamentally people who are bullying don't ever have a suicidal thought in their lives because they're always blaming someone else. And they take the view that anyone who does have a suicidal thought is just a bloody selfish bastard. Whereas if you're an internalizer and your stress reaction goes into those really difficult places, then suicidal thoughts will kick in. And then when we're under enormous amount, significant amounts of stress, and we're, not having a lot of difficulty handling it, and we're avoiding, then we do binging. Then we will do, food or gambling or alcohol or drugs or porn or gaming or social media, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just kind of stop there for a moment, and if there's any questions or comments, but Carli, you were going to share your own experience and story at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I did mention to you when we were looking at these slides that this is one of the most powerful slides I think I've seen because it so clearly shows the reaction and then the output of all that. It makes it very clear and obvious to me. And in my own life, I've definitely fallen into that internalizing reaction. So my experience was in having so much responsibility and caring for other people. 10 years ago, my husband was very, very unwell with severe depression, and I was caring for him. I was caring for my 2 little kids. I was working full time. I was doing all the things, stress on, stress on, stress. And people kept asking me if I was okay, and I kept saying, I'm fine. And I just kept it all to myself. And I followed that line of anxiety and stress that got higher and higher and higher until I could no longer, recognize those signs anymore. That was my new normal. And when my burnout hit, it was both physical and mental. So my immune system shut down. I had pneumonia, I had a heart infection, I was very, very unwell. And my mind shut down, and I describe it as a mental breakdown. It was like I just shut off and there was nothing left. Like it's like that burnt matchstick you see in burnout. That is exactly what I felt like. And I look back at that now that I've learned all of these things about conversations and stress responses, and I think it is astonishing to me that not one person at work ever said, Hey, you don't seem yourself. What's going on? Let's talk. Not once did anybody pick up on those signs and have that conversation. And I believe that could have prevented my experience of burnout.
Mm.
So that's what happened in my story that got me to that burnout end.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carli. And I think as we talked about this earlier, that one of the huge key points was your boss didn't have the ability to see the signs. Well, he might have, but just didn't have the capacity for the conversation. And nor did people around you in the team. So there's no psychological safety for you. Because you know you have to be a blind man not to kind of see this stuff, you know. And even like one of the things that we teach in the safe conversations is that you know we're not trying to play amateur therapists and get into people's lives, but it's about that ability to just connect and create the safety. So if you had been cared for and felt safe to just open up and just share what was going on would have been so helpful, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, haven't we come a long way in 10 years? I mean, that was normal then to not talk about things. People kept talking about going into the gray zone, or I don't want to cross the line into personal life. But now that we all understand how important these conversations are to care for the whole human being at work, including outside external responsibilities and stresses and stuff going on at work, it pleases me no end to see how much these cultures are really shifting into these safe spaces. So I'm glad that it's moved a really long way in that period of time.
Mhm. Excellent. So thanks, Carly. So let's truck on. So, we look at the mental health continuum. Fundamentally, this is a great model developed out of Canada quite a few years ago, green zone, amber, and red zone. And the interesting thing, another lens of looking at this data comes from the Gallup organization. Last year, they'd produced their State of the Global Workplace 2024 report. There was one previous year. And what their numbers for Australia and New Zealand showed that about 25% of people are in the green zone. They're in a good place. They're pretty happy. They bounce forward when things get sort of pretty tough. They see work as a career and a calling. But there are 65% of people who are what Gallup called disengaged or variably engaged. They're stressed, they're stressing and coping, and a lot of frustration. Productivity is variable, burnout often, etc. And then the actively disengaged, around 10%. It's interesting, the Australian Bureau of Statistics numbers, which we talk about in mental health first aid, has this group here around about 20%. 21.4 is the latest number of people who are uh, experiencing a lot of challenges and what would be called diagnosable mental health issues. So this is where the biggest need is, both on the planet and also specifically in organizations. So this is where it's really important that psychosocial safety audits are starting to get a sense of, what are people struggling with and dealing with. So the legislation through Safe Work Australia, so ISO 45003 came in 2021, and then Australia's been pretty quick off the mark. Victoria is going to upgrade their guidelines by December this year. Number one, just like physical safety, identify the hazards. Number two, assess. Number three, put in controls to control the risks, and then to review and maintain. So the model code of practice, which I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with, is that the person conducting a business or an undertaking must ensure, so far as reasonably practical, that workers and other persons are not exposed to risks to their psychological or physical health and safety. And psychosocial factors or hazards are factors in the design or the management of the work that increase the risk of work-related stresses and can lead to those harms. So we've created a map to kind of sequence the range of things, and invariably commitment from leadership is really important. But one of the things that I'm generally sort of hearing, I think it's changing, but it still exists, is that a lot of senior leaders, a lot of managers in general, are in their stress reaction because this is new, because this is, again, just further government bloody interference in, us running our business, all of those kinds of things. So you're getting stress reactions from bosses, senior leaders, of either anger, which is this is a bunch of rubbish, or anxiety or avoidance. And so just recognizing that if you're coming up against that, it's their stress reaction. And so how you kind of help them kind of mitigate that and settle that down is really important. But the need for the hazard assessment, then the control measures and so forth is laid out there. So these are the initial 14 psychosocial hazards, and there's an initial 3 that have been added by Comcare. And so just love to have an understanding in terms of where you are on your journeys with your companies. And so we're just going to do a quick poll here. Carli's going to run a poll, get a sense of where people generally are on their psychosocial safety journey. If you would answer that poll, that would be great. And there's only one answer, really. Either you haven't started yet, you've tweaked your policies and procedures, kind of run around, putting up thou shalt not be a bully. You don't have senior management commitment as yet. You've done your actual psychosocial hazards and risks audit. Or you've started implementing control measures.
While you're doing that, I'll just answer a couple of questions. Rachel, if you want to send me an email, I can get that to you, but everybody will get a copy of the recording from today's event. And a leader, step 2, does it include hazard identification? So if you're referring to the roadmap, yes, it does. If you're referring to the Safe Work Australia 4 steps, step 2 is actually assessing the risks where we look at focus groups. So identification does get included in that process, yes.
So thank you, Carli, for leading this. So what we're seeing is, out of the 11 so far, 2 haven't started, 3 have tweaked some policies. Number one doesn't have senior leadership improvement. 4 have done their hazards and risk audit, and 2 are underway, which is good.
Yeah.
And were you able to get a copy or recording of that, Carli?
Yes, I can include that.
Mm.
And then the second question's actually built in. I don't know how I put 2 questions in the one poll, but it's actually there as well if you want to jump into the next question.
Yes, just come down.
Which,
Which psychosocial hazards have been identified from your audit, or which ones do you think would be likely? And this is multiple choice here. So we've got poor organisational change management, 10 out of 13. High or low job demands, justice is low, low job control, poor support. Oh, good, support's up there. Yeah, change management is a big issue. Bullying's low, okay.
yeah, those 2, so poor organisational change management and high job demands. I hardly ever see low job demands, but high job demands seem to be the top 2 that are showing up in all the audits of our clients overall. So that would probably align with what everyone on the call is thinking today. The other one I'll just make a note of is a lot of leaders say we think bullying is really low. We feel like our culture is pretty good. We've got a good way of reporting risks and things like that. And I've had a few that have been shocked by their report when they see some of those. So it's good to kind of make a guess on where that's at, but this is where the data is just so powerful because it shows it right up there in numbers, particularly when we do a deep dive of bullying, which you're going to have a look at in a minute, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. Good. All righty. So that's great. Thank you, everyone. That gives us kind of a heads up. It certainly indicates that 6 out of 14 have done your hazards and risk assessment and so forth. Good. All right. I'll end the poll there. Look, just as I think we've got share results. That's good. And I'll move that on. Just as a way of kind of understanding, because often a lot of people, what's the difference between a hazard and a risk? So one of the ways to think about this, and I'm a simple kind of guy. So imagine you're walking along a very busy road. So in that instance, the hazard is the very busy road in all the traffic. And the risk of that hazard is quite low if you're a fully functioning adult walking along the side of that road. The risks are very low. However, risks are always context dependent. And so if the context changes to me now having a young puppy, which I've got, who's all over the place, or let's say one kid or two kids that are walking beside that road, because the context has changed in relation to the hazard, then the risk starts to go up. Now, let me give you another example. So I was talking with a senior wellbeing leader in a well-known company a few months ago, and she was telling me that at the time she was doing the work of two people, just for a whole bunch of reasons. And as we talked about that, the psychosocial risk of excessive work demand for her was lower because all the context for her, a la husband's in a good place, kids are in a good place, she could manage. But we talked about the fact that if those circumstances change, that context changed, then the risk associated with that hazard of her doing excessive amounts of work would actually start to go up. So this is where there's a lot of complexity to some degree with a lot of the hazards, because they can be perceived as being quite subjective. So, for example, the senior leaders who are like 3 and 4 levels up, they introduce a change. Let's say a classic one is we're going to put in a new CRM. And most salespeople love a new CRM. Not. So we're going to put in new CRM. We've talked to Salesforce. They've, condescended to believing how magnificent it's going to be. As you then go down the organization, the amount of work and the implications of the change is just massive. So, at high level, hey, no big deal, change, we can handle it. But as the context for the experience, the hazard, the excessive work demands, etc., changes. And so this is why these kind of factors really need the skills of communication and understanding. And it's not just a piece of paper, it's not just tweaking your policies and procedures. Because it actually needs that interaction. So a couple of examples, a couple of case scenarios, a primary industry one and a local government one. So one of the things that we've been encouraging organisations to do is use what the legislators developed to help companies, which is the absolutely free peopleatwork.gov.au psychosocial safety audit. It's absolutely free. It's fully useful, effective. The comprehensive report is fantastic. So in an ideal world, getting leadership commitment works, but you don't have to necessarily have it, because you can actually do a whole bunch of things and then produce evidence for senior leaders. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So a particular example here is that one of our clients they've already been doing some workshops with us around safe conversations, etc. But then they have gone down the track of actually now doing the audit. We recommended people at work. They had 350 of their workers do it. They, made time for them to just come off the line and go to a computer and fill out the report. And they got a 90+% response rate. So it produces a report around psychosocial hazards and risks. And one of the things that I do to unravel the psychobabble is to recognize that what's essentially being looked at for psychosocial safety is social safety, emotional and mental. And social safety will feel safe when we're included. The worst thing you can do to another human being is to ostracize them, kick them out. And we do that in our society. You've been a bad, naughty person, you go to jail. If you've been super naughty, you go into isolation. So inclusion is incredibly important. Secondly, we have emotional safety, which is when we care about each other. And then mental safety is when we're respected. And you put those three in place, they're the essence of psychological safety, which then also creates psychosocial safety as well. So the People at Work survey is looking at the relationship between job demands and job resources. And with both plants, this particular company, they actually had their results come into the green box here in minimal concern. But as we delved into the reports, it was interesting that in both cases, the three big issues were bullying, low job control, and poor organisational management. Not the job control and poor organisational change management weren't huge issues, but certainly the bullying was. And because what the report highlighted was that in the previous 6 months, 26.5% of people had experienced bullying and 25.6% of people had seen it. And that was in plan A. And then in plan B, the numbers were higher, 33 and 34. And what the legislation recommends is that workplaces should aim to have no bullying within their workplaces, just like no planes should fall out of the sky. No one should go to work, experiencing bullying. But we see here 19 once in a while, some of the time, 5 monthly, 2 weekly, and 3 people almost daily. Now, again, you come back to that subjective determination of it, but notwithstanding that, 36 people were witnessing it. So people then often say, oh, okay, it's, bad managers. But in this particular case, and not uncommonly, we're seeing that co-worker 43 and supervisor 37. So a lot of bullying actually happening with each other. And the report gives the kind of examples, abusive language, and a whole raft of things. Whereas in the local government example, again, their report came out, and overall report came out in the green zone. But in their case, they also had quite high levels of bullying, but there were more issues around emotional demands, group conflict, and again, poor organisational change management. So after the audit is done, then the legislative requirements are then to survey all the staff and then just discuss the results. And then often that is done through focus groups. And what we found, when we delivered the focus groups in both locations, is an ability for people to start to open up and sort of talk about what was going on for them. And this is an example of what we cover, kind of understanding bullying, and then starting to talk about sort of case studies and identifying challenges and solutions. And the big distinction that came for one of the sites is that they'd been running safe conversations workshops for their managers and senior leaders, but they hadn't actually trained the managers, the supervisors on the front line. And this is where they started to identify, because we did focus groups with both leaders, first line leaders, and also workers. And this is kind of a key learning and key outcome that came out of that. So that's an example of how do you actually then, and what do you put in place to actually control the risks? And so, most of the psychosocial hazards are, impacting on people, the 75% of people who are, in the amber and red zone. So what we've found from our research work now and working with clients, that the control measures to actually do something to actually manage the risk is, first of all, to train the managers to be able to see the signs and then be able to guide the employee to the appropriate resources and action. The reason why this is so critical is because it's exactly the same as physical safety. So physical safety is you got to notice where there's a hazard. There's a ladder or there's a cord or, there's a mess of things like that. You got to notice the hazards and then do something about it. And that's been one of the fundamental reasons why physical safety and that whole focus on zero harm has become incredibly important. So ultimately, when all this is in place, we'll have a zero harm mentality towards how we work with people and how we sort of see what's going on with people. So number one is the bosses, managers, supervisors got to be able to see the signs where someone is struggling, going back to, Carli's example. Number two is people need to be trained to have self-awareness, to see their own signs and to take appropriate action for themselves. And I call this the new PPE. So, in blue collar environments, PPE, which I'll touch on in a moment, is, hard hats and high vis and all that kind of stuff. The third really important control risk is psychological safety. In other words, the safety of the group of people working together. And when that's in place, then you significantly lower any psychosocial hazards because the people can kind of work together and care about each other and include each other and respect each other. And then, most of those psychosocial hazards kind of just disappear. So number one, training the supervisors, managers, and so forth is how to see the signs where someone's struggling, then to be able to understand what might be the causes, understand the challenges of the conversation, have the skills, and then the resources. And what they're essentially learning is the fundamental distinction between an empathy conversation versus a sympathy conversation. Sympathy conversations, generally, you're telling people what to do. So that's number one. Number two is training the staff to see their own signs. So most of these people have very little self-awareness around their own struggles. And normal PPE, would be helmets and boots and eye protection, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a huge amount of research that identifies that when people have what I call personal protective skills, when they have self-awareness around their own emotional regulation, so they control their stress reaction, when they can collaborate effectively, when they can think effectively and prepare for difficult challenges, have good health awareness, look after their health, have a sense of meaning and purpose, and have tenacity, then the general average level for most people is around 60 to 70% across these 6 domains. And when it gets increased to around 80, 85%, then these people with that skill capability absolutely shift out of amber zone into green zone and are then much more effective at work. So that's a 3-hour interactive workshop, and then training the manager and the team to be safe with each other and psychological safety. So this is around building team culture and performance and the circle approach. And one of the ways to kind of understand this and understand the distinctions here. So me is my mental and emotional wellness. So that's the me. The we is psychological safety. So there's, how we work together as a team, and Google kind of put that on the map with their project Aristotle back in 2016, and Amy Edmondson, et cetera, et cetera. And then, so you got me, and then my contribution to the team, which is we, and then the us, the organization, the company, is psychosocial safety. So that's kind of a way to sort of understand, the psychobabble, because psychological and psychosocial get kind of intermixed all the time, but that's a really, I find, useful way of understanding it. So that workshop consists of understanding bullying and burnout, or whatever the focus is for the group. The circle approach there is around the behaviors, like the C is care, above the line behaviors, below the line behaviors. So we're not, when I'm doing care for someone else or the team, and then when I'm not doing that. So that's a key theme there, identifying challenges and then solutions. So as we head towards kind of wrap up here and allowing some time for questions, so putting in place, because a lot of people are kind of, oh God, what do we do, and how do we meet the regulator requirements and all that kind of stuff. Number one is get started and do an audit. And as an example around that, with one of my clients, we're actually going to roll this out in the next few weeks, next couple of months, is he's a work health and safety manager. He's got 5 shifts that he works with. And he knows that there are some shifts, good shift manager, and they're really in a good place, and then there are others that are not good shift manager. So he's going to do a people work audit across each shift. So we get to see what's going on. We share that with the managers so they can have that self-awareness. And then we're going to be running workshops with each of the team. So I've already done, so they're trained in safe conversations skills already. I've already done some of the PPE work with them, and then we're going to be doing some of the team culture, psychological safety. So this is a really good strategy. It'll tick a lot of boxes. It'll get things really moving well. It'll help you kind of meet your both compliance requirements around psychosocial safety, as well as then start to move into the really wonderful culture aspects as well. So that's kind of enough for me. Carli, did you kind of want to have like anything further to add?
Thanks, Bill. There's just a few questions in the chat. One is in regards to having very low response rates to surveys generally, which is really common. Alida, you're not the only company. You see that a lot. What is most important with response rates for this particular audit is that your senior leaders understand what their legal responsibility and obligation is. Mostly when they're not bought in, it's just a lack of understanding that the new regulations are in place and that they are liable for implementing that process as a director or as a senior leader of the company. So Bill and I do come out and we do talks with senior leaders as a bit of a, here's the landscape and here's the requirement for you. So if you need that, reach out. Once you have had that buy-in, it is up to then team leaders. So every team leader needs to know that they need to bring their team in to fill out the survey to get the response rates up. And then the second bit, which is the assessment of risks, which is the focus groups, is crucial. Because where Bill explained that, busy road scenario and the context is different, the data will mean something to different people. So an inside worker compared to an outside worker, if they're talking about isolation, means 2 completely different things. So doing both of those steps is really critical to getting the data, but also understanding the risk.
And I'll just thank you, Carli. I'll just add to that as an example around local government. Local government generally has inside and outside. And so what happened was that, everyone was surveyed. The survey input was very, very low from the outside people. In the particular example with this one particular council, their buy-in at the senior level was not really strong. There were 2 out of the 6 were committed. So looking back, the advice would have been go with the territory, the divisions of those 2 managers. They're behind it, they're committed. Work with them first. To do your people work audits all free, figure out what's going on with that group. They're keen, they're interested. And then the laggards, the people who are in their stress reaction who don't want to go there, they can then, come along as they feel the need to or have to.
Bill, can you just flick to the final slide? Thanks, Louise. I think all the other questions are answered.
Is this the final slide here, Carl? Oh, this one. Yes, there you go.
Just one more for contacting us. Before we close, and we've got a couple of minutes, so feel free to pop your other questions in the chat. Just before we close, I just wanted to invite you to come along to the Workplace Health and Safety Show because Bill and I are both speaking on the Wellbeing stage. It is in Melbourne, the next one in May. It is a fantastic show, they don't just talk about physical safety, they also talk about psychological safety, and they have a fantastic speaker lineup across the 2 days. It's a free ticket to get in, so I'd highly encourage you to come and join if you'd like to. You can connect with us across any of the social media platforms. Or if you've got more questions or you feel like you've still got a challenge and you just want to book a call with Bill and I, just scan that code and you can find a time. Just check for any other questions. Thank you, Kathy. Glad it was informative for you. There was a lot of information, Bill, but I think you've explained it in a really good way to digest. So thank you very much for all of that.
And we're happy to stay back if there's anyone who'd like to have a chat, unravel anything further that we've covered, because we did cover a bit.
Covered a lot. Thank you, Rachel. Glad you enjoyed it. I don't think there are any other questions. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Susan. I just want to thank everyone for joining today and for interaction. Jumping into the polls and jumping into the chat really enriches these events that we run. So it gives us a bit more of an understanding on where you're at, and we hope we were able to answer your questions today. We would love to work with you. So if what we have done today is really going to be of value to your organisation and to your people, please reach out. We'd love to come and meet with you in your workplace. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Carli.
One
Pleasure as
minute
Thank
to
you.
always.
go.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Thank you, Bill
everybody.
and
Thank you,
Carli.
Alida. Thank you,
Bye.
Brad. Thank you, Ludman.